One Nation, One Election. On December 17th, 2024, Government of India introduced One Nation, One Election bill in the Parliament, which has ignited massive political storm in the country.
It is not an election reforms. It is just a fulfillment of one gentleman's desire and dream. Nothing more than that.
Let's get together and sort of have elections together. Let's change the name of India. It's all distraction. We know it. We understand it. And we're not going to let them do it.
On one hand, the government claims it to be the biggest electoral reform of independent India. The opposition, on the other hand, has gone ahead and called it as violating the very basic structure of Indian constitution.
This bill will finish off regional parties. This bill is only brought in to massage the ego of the supreme leader.
This proposed bill hits the basic structure of the constitution itself.
मैं देख रहा हूं कल से ये बीजेपी वालों ने नया शगुफा छोड़ा है वन नेशन वन इलेक्शन वन नेशन अरे हमको क्या मिलेगा वन इलेक्शन की 10 इलेक्शन की 12 इलेक्शन नहीं चाहिए हम लोगों को वन नेशन वन इलेक्शन.
Okay, first thing first, free and fair elections are the bedrock of any thriving democracy. A reform as big as One Nation, One Election has the potential to shake the very foundations of our electoral system. But what is the truth behind all this political frenzy? Why is the complete opposition standing against this bill? Is the bill really as evil as it has been made out to be? Or are there real merits in the bill? In this video, we will cut through the political chaos and objectively analyze where the truth stands. Okay, so let's start from the top. On 2nd September 2023, the Government of India established a high-level committee chaired by former President Ramnath Kovind to examine the feasibility of simultaneous elections with senior members like Amit Shah and Ghulam Nabi Azad. The committee submitted its comprehensive report to President Draupadi Murmu to initiate the new electoral cycle of simultaneous elections from 2029. And this committee report is what inspired the Constitution 129th Amendment Bill 2024, popularly called as One Nation, One Election Bill, that lays down the process of simultaneous elections. Okay, we will first answer the most basic question. What are simultaneous elections? Simultaneous elections mean holding elections for constituting the House of the People and all the state legislative assemblies together. In the same polling room, there will be two EVMs, where one needs to press two buttons, one on each machine. As a voter, one needs to cast two votes, one to elect the MLA and the other to elect the MP. Before getting into the details of what is proposed in this bill, let us take a road down history as to what is the current manner of holding elections in India. How are elections being conducted in India since independence? So, as of today, elections to Lok Sabha or state assemblies are held as and when the term for each of these houses ends. So, for example, last year in 2024, Lok Sabha elections were held in the month of May. Later in the same year, elections of Haryana was held in October and that of Maharashtra in November. Why, shall you ask? Well, because that's when their previous term ended. But interestingly, this was not always the case. See, the first four general elections till 1967 for state assemblies and House of the People were held almost simultaneously under the same constitution. In fact, the term of 7 state assemblies, Bihar, Madras, Bombay, Mysore, Punjab, Uttar Pradesh and West Bengal were dissolved before their term ended, so that elections could be held simultaneously in 1957. This decision was taken with the consensus of all the parties, central government and state governments. Consensus, I know. However, the cycle of simultaneous elections gradually broke because of premature dissolution of the states. For instance, in Kerala, political instability and frequent changes in the governments led to president's rule and fresh elections in March 1965, just 3 years after the simultaneous elections of 1962. This happened with other states as well. The scenario deteriorated so much that in the decade 1971 to 1980, 14 states went through elections thrice. Odisha had the dubious honor of conducting elections 4 times during the same decade. If we look at the bigger picture from a bird's eye view, from 1952 till 2023, India experienced 6 elections on average every year. In a simultaneous election world, this would be 1 in 5 years. 6 elections in 1 year versus 1 election in 5 years. This is what government wants to achieve. But the question is why the government is so hell-bent upon synchronizing all the elections in the country. Is there something like too many elections and too much democracy? Well, turns out yes, if we go by government's position. The government has some strong arguments to make in favor of simultaneous elections. First, economic cost. As per the government, frequent elections in the country are leading to a huge economic cost. Conducting an election requires money at each level, setting up booths, holding rallies, deploying officials, manufacturing EVMs, public awareness, and whatnot. According to a study by CMS, cost of conducting 2019 Lok Sabha election was 60,000 crore rupees. The same study predicted a cost of 1.35 lakh crores for 2024 Lok Sabha elections. Now this expense includes everything: government expenditure, Election Commission of India's expenditure, political parties, etc. In fact, expenditure incurred by candidates, companies, and political parties is far more than that of government, which is unaccounted and unaudited, which becomes a source of black money, of course, right? Further, according to a government's report, India's national real GDP growth with simultaneous elections would be 1.5 percentage points higher in the immediate next year, which is half of the public spending on health and a third of expenditure on education, which by no means is a small amount. Secondly, not just economic cost, simultaneous elections will reduce unnecessary administrative cost as well. See, every election requires huge deployment of administrative resources in terms of teachers, government servants, polling personnel, security personnel. For example, schools infrastructure is used for polling and not teaching on the day of the elections. In 2019 Lok Sabha elections, the Election Commission of India enlisted the services of approximately 70 lakh personnel to serve as polling officials overseeing the election process at 12 lakh polling stations nationwide. So every time elections happen, government needs to divert these resources from their day-to-day functioning. That itself is a cost. Third is the issue of policy paralysis. See, beyond these economic and administrative costs, something invisible yet very profound thing happens in the country every time there is an election. Whenever elections are announced, there is something called Model Code of Conduct that comes into force. A Model Code of Conduct is a set of guidelines issued by Election Commission of India for the conduct of political parties and candidates in order to ensure a free and fair elections. Among other things, this code of conduct prevents the government from announcing any new schemes or development work so that party in power does not influence the voters unfavorably. This actually brings day-to-day development works in the region of the election to a complete standstill.
हर कुछ महीने में भारत में कहीं न कहीं बड़े चुनाव हो रहे होते हैं। इससे विकास के कार्यों पर जो प्रभाव पड़ता है, उसे आप सब भली भांति जानते हैं। ऐसे में वन नेशन वन इलेक्शन पर गहन अध्ययन और मंथन आवश्यक है।
Now this Model Code of Conduct comes into force the day elections are announced by the Election Commission of India and stays in force till the announcement of results, which can take about a couple of months. Frequent elections tend to halt the development process of the nation and thus leading to policy paralysis.
देश ने बार बार चुनाव इस देश की प्रगति में रुकावट बन रहे हैं, गतिरोध पैदा कर रहे हैं।
The government intends to end this frequent disruption. Last and certainly not the least is the problem of voter fatigue. According to a study conducted by Professor Saba Nicolini of Concordia University, Canada, it has been found that the current practice of holding separate elections in India is discouraging the greater participation of electorate in the democratic process. People are choosing one election over the other to cast their votes. So practically what it means is people are tired of voting again and again. This phenomena is called as voter fatigue. For instance, in 1999, Karnataka, Maharashtra and Andhra Pradesh experienced a nearly 11.5% increase in voter turnout when elections were held simultaneously. Similarly, in 1977, simultaneous elections in Kerala held along with national elections led to an almost 20% increase in voter participation. So these are the major reasons that government cites as a rationale to bring in one nation, one election reform. So all these seem like fair points, right? I mean, who can oppose economic benefits associated with the simultaneous reforms? Who would not want development works to progress seamlessly? And of course, who on earth would want a voter who is tired of this dance of democracy? Well, opposition has some real fears when it comes to one nation, one election bill. First, opposition claims that the whole process of one nation, one election is anti-federal and its implementation requires constitutional and systemic disruption. See, state assemblies are independent constitutional bodies that derive their powers and authority from the same constitution as parliament. They are in no way subservient or subject to center or parliament. Synchronizing state elections with parliament would essentially mean forcing state assemblies' term to coincide with that of parliament. For instance, the parliament term is supposed to begin in 2029 and it will end in 2034. A state like Delhi, which is supposed to go for elections in 2030, will have its term end in 2034, 1 year earlier. So, Delhi gets a term of 4 years, as against a full term of 5 years, in order to hold simultaneous elections in 2034. The whole system of current electoral process will have to be changed in order to maintain this synchrony of simultaneous elections. This is against the spirit of federalism. This might be a little confusing, but stay with me. I'll explain this whole process of holding simultaneous elections in just a few minutes. But anyways, we will continue with opposition's critique of One Nation, One Election bill. Coming to second point, the opposition says One Nation, One Election bill will lead to dominance of national parties over regional parties. See, India is a federal country where powers are divided between different levels of government. For example, center has the jurisdiction over subjects like external affairs and national security, while subjects like health and education fall within the purview of state. So critics argue that simultaneous elections have the potential of hijacking state issues by national issues. For example, national security following Balakot airstrike became the focal point of elections in 2019. Do you really think a state election in, say, a state like Karnataka should be fought over this national issue? For Karnataka, local issue of Kaveri river water may matter more as far as elections for representation in state assembly is concerned, which is a very fair point. With the resources and machinery that national parties have at their disposal, state parties would be in no position to compete with them, and voters generally tend to vote for the same party in the simultaneous elections. One Nation, One Election bill definitely seems to be running the risk of drowning out state local issues and voices. Third is the issue of dilution of accountability. Opposition contends that ours is a parliamentary form of democracy that stands on the firm footing of government's accountability to the legislature. Now, we as citizens of this nation elect representatives to the parliament and state assemblies. Thus, effectively, government is accountable to citizens via elections, among other things. This process of regular elections keeps the government on its toes. This keeps the government's action in check, as the government always have one eye towards the election. One Nation, One Election bill will dilute this power of accountability that citizens hold.
5 साल में नेता कब आपके अंडर में आता है? जब चुनाव होता है। उसके अलावा तो कोई नेता अंडर में नहीं आता। अब हमारे देश में हर 6 महीने चुनाव होते हैं, तो अब मोदी जी को बड़ी तकलीफ हो रही है। हर 6 महीने जनता में जाके उनसे कुछ कहना पड़ता है, तो वो कह रहे 5 साल में एक बार। भाई साहब, अगर 5 साल में एक बार कर दिया तो 5 साल बाद सिलेंडर 5,000 रुपए का मिलेगा। ये सोच 5,000 का सिलेंडर मिलेगा और मोदी जी 5 साल बाद आके कहेंगे 200 रुपए माफ कर दिए तुमने। ये जो 250 रुपए किलो टमाटर हो रहा है ना, ये 1,500 रुपए किलो टमाटर मिलेगा अगर वन नेशन वन इलेक्शन कर दिया। कभी मत करना। मेरी तो मांग है 1 नेशन 20 इलेक्शन होने चाहिए। हर तीसरे महीने चुनाव होना चाहिए। हर तीसरे महीने चुनाव होगा, कम से कम ये कुछ तो दे के जाएंगे।
Further, experts are claiming that all the merits of One Nation, One Election bill propounded by the government, even though real, do not hold weight when compared to the potential damage they will have. For instance, the argument of policy paralysis is true, however, it becomes hollow when one realizes that for a given state, in a span of 5 years, Model Code of Conduct will come into effect only twice, which is a max of 4 months. Similarly, we should not hesitate to bear the economic and administrative cost for a thriving democracy. In fact, holding simultaneous election would require more money and resources for the first time, which is estimated by Election Commission of India to be around 8,000 crores. Fifth, opposition claims this is another government's political gimmick to take the focus away from the real issues of farmer distress and unemployment in the country. Recent Supreme Court panel highlighted plight of farmers in Haryana and Punjab, where farmers' debt have been constantly rising to the tune of thousands of crores. Similarly, a Labour Ministry report few years back confirmed highest unemployment rate in last 40 years.
वन नेशन वन इलेक्शन कुछ नहीं, एक शगुफा है असल मुद्दों से भटकाने का। आप बेरोजगारी की बात मत करिए, आप जो उनकी नफरत और हिंसा की बातें हमारे नेता प्रतिपक्ष के खिलाफ कह रहे हैं उन पर बातें मत करिए। इसलिए वन नेशन वन इलेक्शन का ढोल बजाया जा रहा है। आप
Let's get together and sort of have elections together. Let's change the name of India. This is all distraction. We know it. We understand it. And we're not going to let them do it.
the opposition has some real grounds to voice their concerns. We will try to find some sense of opposition's arguments now. For instance, how on earth is government going to uproot this whole system of electoral system that has been going on for over 7 decades in a single go? Every state has its own timelines of holding election, couple it with premature dissolution of assemblies that we have seen numerous times since independence. How will we synchronize all these elections? Well, turns out government does have a well thought out plan as laid out in One Nation, One Election bill. The government has proposed a two-step process. In step 1, the election to the parliament and legislative assemblies will be held simultaneously. And in step 2, elections to the municipalities and panchayats will be held within the 100 days of general election. Let's delve into the first step first. In order to synchronize all these elections, government has proposed a one-time transitory measure. See, last year we had general election of 2024. The next one will happen in 2029. After the general elections of 2029, when the House of the People will be constituted, President, on the first date of sitting of the House, will bring into force the provisions of the bill by notification. This date will be called appointed date. Now just keep in mind, this House will have its term end in 2034. Next, all the elections of the assemblies after this appointed date will also have their term expired in 2034, irrespective of the date of the constitution of the assembly. For instance, going back to the same Delhi example, elections to the state of Delhi will be held this year in 2025 and again in 2030. Now this election of 2030 is after the appointed date. The term for the assembly constituted in 2030 will end with the House of the People in 2034. That is after 4 years and not 5. So every state will have this term curtailed as a one-time measure. After this, all the states will have a full term of 5 years. This would result in the Lok Sabha and all the state assemblies being ready for a simultaneous election in 2034. That's not all. After this, if the assemblies get dissolved because of any reason, be it hung assembly or passage of no confidence motion, the elections will be held right away. These elections will be called midterm elections. However, the term of this newly constituted state assembly will not be 5 years, but it would end with the same cycle of general election. This term will be called the unexpired term as against the full term of 5 years. For the second step, elections to the municipalities and panchayats will be held within the 100 days of general election. They will also have election in the same pattern. If some municipalities get dissolved before the full term, the newly constituted ones will have their term till the next general election, and thus maintaining the synchrony of simultaneous elections. So that's the whole government's plan. Further, the experts have made it absolutely clear that this one-time transitory phase, when states will have a shorter term, will in no way be counter to the federal spirit of constitution as claimed by the opposition. After 2034, all the states will still continue to have a full term of 5 years. Some of the opposition points are fair, like threat to the plight of regional parties, or dilution of accountability with less number of elections. Further, we must surely weigh how much financial and economic benefit we will have in the long run once this initial expenditure of conducting simultaneous elections is incurred. These are definitely the red flags if we choose to go ahead with this bill. While One Nation, One Election bill seems like it will bring efficiency, but how far are we ready to trade it off with accountability? That's a question we need to think ourselves. We actually don't need to look far to see simultaneous elections at work. Andhra Pradesh is a classic example. Andhra Pradesh has seen 10 simultaneous elections. Past 25 years of consecutive simultaneous elections have shown higher voter turnout. In the 2024 elections, nearly 81% of Andhra Pradesh electorate participated in the elections, which was 15% higher than the national average. Not only that, in the previous elections of 2019, despite Modi's wave, Andhra Pradesh voted massively in favor of YSR Congress, both for the parliament and for the state. So they did vote for the same party, but that same party was not a national party, but a state party. There are other examples in our country itself where regional parties continue to perform well and form governments while being part of the simultaneous elections with Lok Sabha. As citizens of this nation, we are once again thrown in the middle of this vicious political chaos of government versus opposition and BJP versus Congress. However, does a temporary transitory phase to align all the elections that would reduce state assemblies' term for once really threaten the federal structure of the Indian nation? When the term would be known in advance even before the elections? Or does it sound like an hollowed argument? Historically, voters have tended to vote in favor of the same party, both for the state as well as for the Lok Sabha. But in the end, it comes down to how much do we trust our citizens? as a democracy, if we are trusting our citizens to make that decision of electing the right people for running the government once, can't we trust that they would make the decision right twice in a single day? Because that's what it comes down to. Is the argument that they will tend to vote for the same party really tenable? Why should it really matter? It's citizens' choice. And as we have seen in the case of Andhra Pradesh, that same party was a local state party. Should we not just let citizens decide what they think is best for the nation? Should we not trust voters of this nation that they are intelligent enough to differentiate what is important for the state and what is important for the nation while exercising the right to vote? Because if we can't, then we really need to think about elections and democracy as a means of governance to achieving welfare state. One nation, one election is an idea that has worked in the first 15 years of independent India. Andhra Pradesh continues to have simultaneous elections predominantly. It works in democratic nations like South Africa and Germany. Surely, the one nation, one election is an idea whose time has come. This was Rahul Poonia. Namaskar. I'll see you in the next one.